The problem of the formation of the state is not insoluble, even for a race of devils, granted that they have intelligence. Okay, how's that for a hook? We're diving right in today with one of the absolute wildest, most counterintuitive ideas ever put to paper in political philosophy. The legendary 18th century thinker Immanuel Kant is basically telling us right here that we do not need a society of perfectly moral, angelic humans to create a peaceful, functioning state. No, we literally just need smart devils.
So that forces us to grapple with the ultimate paradox. Can human selfishness, discord, and, believe it or not, even war, actually be the very things that guarantee perpetual peace? It sounds completely backward to how we normally think about conflict and harmony, right? But that is exactly the profound mystery we're going to unravel today. Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here with us. Our goal today is to decode Kant's fascinating manuscript, specifically his supplements to Perpetual Peace, and translate these really dense 18th century philosophical concepts into a clear, engaging journey. We're going to see exactly how Kant believed nature actively uses our absolute darkest impulses to build a harmonious world.
Here's our roadmap for the heavy logic we'll be tackling together. First, nature's paradoxical master plan. Second, war as a catalyst. Third, a race of devils. Fourth, culture, commerce, and peace. Fifth, the secret philosopher clause. And finally, number 6, politics united with morals.
Let's jump straight into Section 1, Nature's Paradoxical Master Plan, How Discord Creates Harmony.
Kant's core thesis is that harmony springs directly from human discord. But to really grasp this, we've got to distinguish between two big concepts, providence and nature. Why does he specifically use the word nature for his guarantee of peace instead of providence? Well, providence implies this deep, underlying divine wisdom. It requires religious faith to believe God is orchestrating events behind the scenes. But Kant, he wants to keep his theory strictly grounded in observable human experience. He argues that using the term nature is just far less presumptuous. It lets us look at the mechanical cause and effect course of human history without boldly claiming we know the unfathomable mysteries of God's will. Nature is something we can actually see and observe.
Moving on to Section 2, War as a Catalyst, the Unlikely Peacemaker.
This brings us to a massive, almost uncomfortable paradox. Nature uses the ultimate evil, war, as her primary tool for laying the groundwork for peace. Kant lays out this very specific cause and effect chain. First, nature ensures humans can live basically everywhere on Earth. But how does she force them to actually spread out? Well, step 1, war scatters humanity. Step 2, that conflict drives populations into the harshest, most inhospitable regions of the globe. And step 3, because they're pushed into these extreme environments, they are literally compelled to form internal structures and create laws just to survive and defend themselves against their neighbors.
To back this up, Kant points to historical evidence, like the Samietes and Laplanders up near the Arctic Ocean. He notes how they were separated from allied linguistic groups by hostile, warlike tribes. He even asks a pretty brilliant rhetorical question. What else but war could have brought people to the freezing northern wastes of America? In these brutal climates, they have to rely on driftwood carried by ocean currents just to build weapons and huts. The absolute harshness of it all forces them to live at peace with one another internally simply because they have so much work to do just to stay alive. So, war pushed them there, which in turn forced the establishment of secure, lawful societies.
Which leads us to Section 3, A Race of Devils, Selfishness as a Building Block.
Now this brings us right back to that mind-bending idea from the very beginning. Moral perfection is absolutely not required to build a functioning, peaceful state. Kant presents his famous race of devils problem right here in his original 18th century text. People so often argue that a true republic requires a society of angels. Kant flat out rejects that. He says, look, if you have a multitude of rational beings who all need laws to survive, but where each individual secretly wants to exempt themselves from those laws, you don't need to morally reform mankind. You literally just need a good constitution. A solid republican constitution acts as a flawless structural counterbalance. Think of it like a giant machine. It takes those very self-seeking, selfish propensities and pits them directly against one another. It checks their destructive activity, it totally neutralizes their negative external effects. And the result? Every single individual is compelled to be a good citizen, even if they aren't a morally good person deep down. Their outward behavior becomes completely indistinguishable from true morality purely because the system forces them to behave. Nature's mechanism uses our own bad intentions to build the empire of right. Absolutely wild, isn't it?
All right, Section 4, Culture, Commerce, and Peace, Divided by culture, united by coin.
So, you might be wondering, if nature forces people into individual states, why not just build one giant, one-world government to guarantee peace? Well, because nature actively prevents it. On one hand, she separates nations, using differences in language and religion to keep us apart. Why? To prevent a soulless, despotic, universal monarchy that would inevitably sink right into anarchy. So she uses cultural rivalry to avoid global tyranny. But on the flip side, she actually unites these separate nations, not through brotherly love or moral duty, but through something much more reliable: mutual economic self-interest and the commercial spirit.
The crucial point is captured so perfectly in this quote. The commercial spirit cannot coexist with war, and sooner or later it takes possession of every nation. Kant observes that of all the powers at a state's command, the power of money is, without a doubt, the most reliable. States find themselves forced to mediate and avert war. Not because they're taking the moral high ground, but simply because war is terrible for business. They protect the peace out of sheer economic greed. Once again, nature takes our base desires and uses them to achieve a noble end.
Let's move to Section 5, the Secret Philosopher Clause, Advice from the Shadows.
If the mechanism of nature is doing all this heavy lifting, what role is left for the thinkers? Well, Kant proposes a fascinating, actually kind of humorous, secret article for international treaties. He points out that it hurts the dignity of a powerful state to openly ask its own subjects for advice on the rules of war and peace. It makes the government look weak, right? So what's his workaround? The state must secretly and silently invite philosophers to speak freely. And it does this simply by not forbidding the public expression of their opinions.
Kant is intensely pragmatic here. He famously states that the possession of power is inevitably fatal to the free exercise of reason. He actually doesn't want kings to become philosophers, or philosophers to become kings. Power corrupts the mind's ability to reason freely. But for a state to be truly enlightened, it absolutely must allow the class of philosophers to exist and speak openly. They're basically incapable of forming rebel factions, so they pose zero physical threat, but their free, unfiltered discourse is vital for the state to understand its true duties.
And that brings us to our final section, number 6, Politics United with Morals, Resolving the Final Conflict.
We finally arrive at the ultimate relationship between the messy, highly practical world of politics and the pure, idealistic world of moral philosophy. Kant sets up this classic tension for us. On one side, politics tells leaders to be wise as serpents, use strategy, secrecy, and expediency. On the other side, morals demand that we be guileless as doves, acting with pure honesty and unconditional obedience to duty. If these two things cannot stand together, we've got a massive, unsolvable quarrel on our hands. It's that age-old debate: can a successful politician actually be a good person?
Well, Kant's ultimate resolution is incredibly profound. He argues that morals is, by definition, a practical science. It's the sum total of laws we ought to act upon. Therefore, it's completely absurd to say we cannot act upon them. He totally dismisses the idea of any real antagonism between the two, championing the classic saying, "Honesty is the best policy." True politics, he insists, cannot take a single step forward without first paying homage to morals. While the mechanism of nature absolutely uses our selfishness to build the framework, the ultimate long-term stability of a society requires politics and morality to be in complete accord.
Which leaves us with a really compelling final thought to chew on. As we look at the endless conflicts in our modern world, we are constantly complaining about the lack of morality in our politicians, aren't we? But based on Kant's brilliant analysis, maybe we should be asking a totally different question. Are we relying way too much on the personal morality of our leaders, instead of focusing on designing better republican systems that actually harness human selfishness into the public good? It's a fascinating lens through which to view history and our current reality. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the architecture of peace. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.